Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining tonight. I'm Evan Meyer, the Executive Director at Theodore Payne Foundation, and I'm excited to be here with you to talk about the drought. So as we get going here, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. Theodore Payne Foundation acknowledges that it sits on the traditional village of Wikonga, which is the ancestral homelands of the Wikonbatam, who are now known as the Fernandino-Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. And we acknowledge our neighbors, the Tongva, Chumash, Tataviam, Katanamuk, and Serrano, the original stewards of what is now Los Angeles County. And we are committed to uplifting the names of these lands and community members from the over 200 California First Nations who reside alongside us. And we honor their traditional ecological knowledge and very much so their relationship to the land and the water that flows throughout this land. So with that, I'm going to get started here. And sometimes when you're trying to think about a situation, it helps to leave the place that you are and look outside. So that's how we're going to start today on this snowy scene in a park in the Northeast, say. Let's just say this is New York City. Now, we've learned to tolerate this snowy landscape and these trees that are devoid of leaves and flowers. And, you know, it's okay, but wouldn't it be cool if we could have leaves this time of year? What if I told you that we can? We could do this. We could put space heaters out in every park, in every city, in every cold part of the world, and we can have summer in the winter. Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be amazing? You're probably thinking, no, that's a terrible idea, Evan. You are insane. That's incredibly wasteful and foolish. Yet that's basically what we do here in Southern California. We've normalized it here. It doesn't seem weird to us. It seems totally natural to have these vibrant green landscapes all year round. But we're basically doing that same thing. We're importing energy, or in this case, importing water to create an artificial environment that we superimpose on the natural climate, the natural ecosystem. So we're going to dig deep into that tonight. And we're going to explore the drought and open up some conversations and questions, talk about the history of water a little bit, talk about how water gets to us, talk about different trends and tastes in the landscape industry, and then talk about what we can do as individuals and as community members to navigate this drought that we're in and hopefully use it to have a much better environmental outcome for our region. So we're going to start with just understanding where we are, which is California and our climate, which is considered to be a Mediterranean type climate, which means that it is a climate of hot, dry summers and mild, wet winters. And that's shared with several other parts of the world, including Northern Africa, Europe, Southern Europe, Chile, South Africa, Southwestern Australia. And all of these regions have this cyclical drought every year. So every year it's a wet and rainy winter and a very dry summer. We basically know that from April through November, we're pretty much not going to get any rain. And that's a normal and natural part of our the land and the climate here. And that is very much true for California, as well as little bits of Southern Oregon and down into Baja California, which are part of this Mediterranean region, climate region of Western North America, also known as the California Floristic Province. When we zoom out a little bit and look at the whole country and the water precipitation throughout all of the United States, we see that, yes, indeed, the West is drier than the East, but it's not as clear cut as that. There's actually some of the wettest areas in the country are in the West. And even parts of California are quite wet and have the same precipitation as you would see in, say, the East Coast, where it rains all the time. The difference being that these wet regions of the West are restricted to certain parts, such as the Sierra Nevada mountains or the northern coastal areas of California. And that really is going to play into the conversation about water. in a couple of ways. One is that even though these areas do get a lot of precipitation, it all comes at a certain time of year, much of it coming as snowfall, and it sits there in the mountains. And as it melts, it creates bigger flows in the rivers. And the other thing is that the rainfall and the precipitation, the snowfall in these parts of the state are really impacting the water that we see here. So the amount of rain that falls in Los Angeles is not necessarily the thing that we need to be thinking about. We should be thinking about where does our water come from and how much precipitation is happening there. To understand that, it's useful to think about the natural state of water in California. And here's a map of all the rivers in California. You've got a couple of major deltas, such as the Bay Delta, and then a lot of smaller rivers throughout the southern mountain ranges that drain into the Pacific. You have the Colorado River, which drains a lot of the western United States, including the western side of the Rockies, and that gets to the ocean, or it should get to the ocean, I should say, down in the Gulf of California. And then you also have a series of interior lakes, such as the Owens Lake, that are terminal. They just end inland and they never make it to the sea. So this natural flow state of California has been heavily, heavily altered in the last several hundred years. And there's no real way of sugarcoating it. It was a pretty intense and often not very good outcome for the landscape. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of what has happened to water in the western United States, I would recommend this book, Cadillac Desert, which we have in our bookstore here, which really details the process and often very short-sighted movements of water and damming of rivers. And then you can't talk about water without bringing up the movie Chinatown, which is a classic film that is sort of set in early Los Angeles during the era when water was being, allocated in different ways and all of the interesting and strange permutations of that. So I can't really fully delve into the entire complexity of this because it's a massive historical event, but I can point to some of the biggest sources of water today. And there's a couple that are useful to know about. The major sources for Los Angeles. We have the California State Water Project, which sends water from Northern California down through the San Joaquin Valley and is then utilized here in Los Angeles. If you have driven up the 5 heading towards Sacramento or San Francisco, driven through the Grapevine, you've driven past Lake Castaic and Pyramid Lake, which are both man-made reservoirs that are points along the distribution of the California State Water Project. Another major source of water in Los Angeles is the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which brings water from the Owens Valley. That is exclusive to Los Angeles, and it basically is on land owned now by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and that's water that comes down here through the aqueduct. And then another major source being the Colorado River, which is a natural river that goes from the sort of interior western United States, meets the ocean at the Gulf of California. And as I mentioned, it's being utilized so heavily that it doesn't even make it to the ocean anymore. Actually, it's completely dried up the flows, with water being distributed to agricultural lands in the Imperial Valley, down into urban landscapes of Southern California, as well as urban parts of Arizona and Nevada. And when we really drill down here in LA, we can see, kind of the allocations of water, where we're actually getting our water from. So 38% comes directly from the LA Aqueduct, and that's basically managed directly by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And then 49% is coming from what is called purchased water, which is water that the Department of Water and Power buys from the Metropolitan Water District. And of that purchased water, 41% is coming through the State Water Project, and 8% coming through the Colorado River. And then there's little bits of other sources, 11% being groundwater and 2% being recycled. So one of the things that I kind of noticed looking at this right away is that there's a lot of room to grow in those last two categories of groundwater and recycled water. And as we head into a future, I really hope that we can start utilizing a lot more recycled water, particularly for landscaping, as I'll get to later in the presentation, as well as cleaning up our groundwater so that we can reduce our reliance on imported water and have a more stable water future here. Now, when we zoom out to the whole state and try to understand how is water being used, it's kind of useful to think about from my perspective. And it's interesting how it's sort of put together, or at least understood by the experts. And I should mention that I'm not a water expert, and developing this presentation has been an interesting experience of just learning more about our water sources and thinking through, what this means and how we can move forward. So I'm learning this as we go, and as we discuss. If you have questions, put them in the chat. I won't be reading the chat, but after the presentation ends, we can have a conversation and open up and have a dialogue about all these issues. But getting back to this slide here, 50% is what's called environmental, and basically that just means it's free-flowing, undammed rivers, water that doesn't get used for human purposes, that just stays sort of within its natural system. And then about half of the water is used by humans in the state, with 40% of the total water use being agricultural and 10% urban residential. But if you look at it through the lens of human use, 80% of the water use is going to agriculture and 20% is going to urban and residential use. And of that 20% of urban and residential use, more than half, a little more than half, goes to outdoor landscaping. So in total, if you look at all of the human use of water, it's over 10% is going to outdoor landscaping in urban and suburban environments. And that's a significant number unto itself that's very worth focusing on, of reducing that consumption. But it becomes even more important to think about that when you kind of de-aggregate this and you look at our region, the South Coast region, where the vast majority of water is going to urban use in our region. And so that means a very significant portion of all the water used in the South Coast portion of the state is urban landscaping. So landscaping really plays into our water future here, and that's what we're going to focus on tonight. Now, we've all been reading the headlines, and they are scary. I mean, there's just no way around it. Western mega drought is the worst in 1,200 years, intensified by climate change. That's a scary thing to read about. And based on that, the Metropolitan Water District is declaring emergency water shortages. And particularly, they're worried about the State Water Project, that water coming from Northern California down the San Joaquin Valley, which is much lower quantities this year that can be allocated to come down south. As I was doing research for this, I started to kind of look around at other drought situations that have happened in the past. And one really interesting case study was Cape Town that happened a few years ago, where they almost ran out of water. And there was very serious talk of shutting off faucets there, so that you would turn on, you go to your shower and turn the knob and no water would come out. And they were actually talking about having kind of people line up and get a certain allocation of water each day, and it was going to be a very small amount. Luckily, they were able to reduce their consumption a lot, and the rains kind of came back and they were able to avert that. But with climate change, nobody knows what the future is going to hold, and we could be seeing pretty severe and strict water restrictions on top of what we're already seeing, which are pretty significant here for Southern California. And so I mentioned that Metropolitan Water District is kind of the big wholesaler. So they supply water through the Colorado River as well as the California State Water Project, and then they sell that water to different member agencies. And Los Angeles Department of Water and Power is a member agency of that bigger umbrella. buying water from the Metropolitan Water District. So the big news over the last few months has been the Metropolitan Water District cutting outdoor watering through their member agencies, and each jurisdiction is a little bit different. So I'm going to focus on Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which set their own restrictions, and they're a little bit less stringent than some of the other parts of Southern California. But basically what they are telling people with these new restrictions are requiring is that watering with sprinklers is limited to twice per week for a maximum of 8 minutes per watering, up to 15 minutes for higher efficiency sprinklers. That hand watering and drip are allowed except for during the day. So you can kind of always hand water as long as it's before 9 a.m. or after 4 p.m. And when we talk about native plants, that's going to become very important because that's actually a really good way to water, hand watering. They don't want to see any runoff. So those little rivers that run down the side of the road, or on the little curb, there's a little river. They don't want to see that. Hand watering should be done with shut-off nozzles so that when you go from plant to plant, you can turn your water off and be very targeted. And another one that plays into the kind of garden maintenance is not using water to wash hardscape. So no, washing off your driveway with water, no spraying your patio with water, using a broom instead, or something else to clean things. So that's kind of the big picture of where we're at right now and what the restrictions are. And I do encourage you to look more deeply. If you're not in LA, there's going to be different restrictions. But these are going to change the landscape drastically, because what we have right now takes a lot more water than that. What is the norm will not survive on this amount of water. And so I want to talk about that, but to kind of get there, I want to back up a little bit and just think about, where the city is now and how it ended up this way. Because when we go back to that image that I opened the presentation with of the lawn spraying water, which is sort of the equivalent in my mind of putting space heaters outside in a park in New England in the winter. How do we get to the point where that just seems totally normal to us to have that high of water use throughout our entire urban landscape? So we're going to go back to the pre-colonial era, where there were many people living in Southern California in much more harmonious relationship with the landscape, with the ecology, and the water uses. And I think there's a lot we can learn from those perspectives of honoring the land, honoring the ecology, thinking of ourselves as part of, rather than sort of the master of. We are part of this land. We don't get to, we have to live with the land and honor it and treat water as the sacred thing that it is. And if you are interested in this idea and the modern representation of this philosophy, I encourage you to check out a place called Currabunga Springs, which is a Tongva village site where they are restoring a beautiful native plant landscape with groundwater, treating the water as a sacred commodity it is, building community around that. And it's really quite amazing to see that. And that is a vision, a glimmer of hope for what I hope our future can be. Because we've done things not so well in the last several hundred years, going back to the early days of Los Angeles. This is the Los Angeles Plaza in 1858, and it was a pretty relatively small town then. It was mostly agricultural. It's a colonial space. Missions started, and then people, European settlers arrived. And it didn't grow exponentially because of water. There wasn't enough water to build the giant city we have today. And the growth of Los Angeles is relatively recent in a lot of ways. So even if you go back to 1884 in this map, you see Highland Park up in the upper corner there. These are big agricultural tracts. It's not the dense kind of urban city yet that it is today. And the thing that made Los Angeles what it is water. And here's the opening of the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which opened in 1913. And that really changed our region and allowed many, many more people to live here because there was so much more water available all of a sudden. People lining up and on this dedication of the aqueduct in November of 1913, and Mulholland, his quote during the ceremony was, "This rude platform is an altar, and on it we are here consecrating this water supply and dedicating the aqueduct to you and your children and your children's children for all time. That's all." So it really changed things, having that water brought into Los Angeles, and it created the modern LA, which here it is. This is a photo by Edward Bertinsky of Los Angeles from the sky. And it's a huge sprawling city. We all know that. And one of the sort of misconceptions I feel about Los Angeles that we get from other parts of the country is it's just a giant concrete slab. You know, it's this big concrete place. And there are elements of truth to that. And I feel like I can speak to this because I'm from the East Coast, and I remember hearing about LA growing up. And before I moved here, people were just like, "Oh, it's all concrete out there." There's truth to it, but there's also a lot of plants and a lot of vegetation embedded within our urban landscapes. And you can see it even on this photo, but when you drive around, you'll see this time and time again. And I've been driving around a lot in preparation for this talk, of looking at different landscapes and just really trying to think, you know, what's going on here? What do we expect to happen in the future? And by and large, the thing that you'll see over and over and over again is lawns. Lawns completely dominate the urban landscape of Los Angeles. Here they are, for better or worse. When we drill back into, you know, why do we have lawns? What's up with that? Well, it's another story of colonialism, basically. Lawns emerge from the sort of pastoral landscapes of European aristocracy. The wealthy lords and ladies had their castles, and around their castles they had agricultural lands for grazing animals, and that was sort of a status symbol of wealth. And that became something that everyone kind of coveted. And, you know, to be honest, there are benefits to having lawns. You know, they're good places to recreate. But they've become something that we don't often use for recreation these days. They're just purely ornamental. And I can see arguments for lawns that people are walking on, playing on, having picnics on. I don't see any argument these days for a lawn in California that is purely ornamental, because it's incredibly wasteful of water. And you can go back and really trace the importation of this cultural phenomenon into California landscapes in old newspapers. So I did some digging a few years ago on this, and I found an article from the California Farmer and Journal of Useful Sciences, the 10th of May, 1855, and the author writes, "Few who have not seen or trod the velvet turf of England can fully realize its surpassing beauty. We shall not deny that the peculiar climate of that kingdom, tempered as it is by its surrounding sea, with an atmosphere ever moist and humid, is particularly favorable to the perfection of the English lawns. But that we cannot very nearly imitate them with the same care and attention which have chiefly contributed to make them what they are, there we also deny." So he's basically saying, aren't these lawns amazing? Aren't they great? We should have them in California, and we can have them in California, and we're gonna have them in California. And for better or worse, the author was right. I mean, this became the dominant force here. I can share the link to this if people are interested, this article, this newspaper article, because it's really interesting to think about. It goes on from this sort of introduction to this really laborious process of creating a lawn in California prior to the invention of irrigation systems. So it's actually completely insane when you read it, because it's like you're going to till the soil at this time of year, and then you're going to seed it this time of year, and you have to do this, this, and this. And I just thought, like, wow, in these early days of California, you know, the modern kind of colonial California, the fact that people love lawns that much, to spend that much time and resources, is kind of crazy of how big of a kind of element in our cultural zeitgeist. The lawn was and is today. And as you drive around the city today, you'll see them still, and they're still green. So people are not following their water restrictions across the board. This photo I took 2 days ago. It's a very green lawn. I did read an article that the agencies are seeing pretty big reductions in water use, and they're also seeing a lot more people putting out water, informing them of when water is being wasted. So there's progress, but clearly some people aren't in compliance. And I know that's true because you can see a lot of examples of landscapes like this, where you'll have on the one side of that image, you see the very green lawn, and then the other side, what it would look like if you're not watering it. So those lawns will not stay green if you don't water them. And there have been all sorts of different ideas about what lawns should be replaced with. So we're going to go through a few of those right now. This is a house, just sort of like a standard sort of mid-century house. I found this in an article in Sunset Magazine from a couple of years back. The owners took this lawn landscape and they turned it into this tropical front yard, which has tea plants and cycads and palm trees and alpinia. And what's really kind of amazing about this article is that when they converted it from lawn to tropical landscape, it actually ended up saving water. So you look at this and you think, wow, that looks like Honolulu. That must be using tons and tons of water. And it is using a lot more water than other alternatives, but it's still using less than a lawn, which is insane to think about. The boring, mundane lawn takes up that much water that you can have a tropical front yard with less water use. That's just crazy to me. Now, I don't advocate for this type of landscape. If you live in California, if you live in Honolulu, that's a different story. But some of the other alternatives that are out there, one you're going to see over and over again, more and more of these days, is the gravel yards, where the grass is replaced and gravel just goes down. This may seem like a good idea because you're saving water, but if you think about the implications of what this is going to do, first of all, it's a completely sterile environment. There's no place for any life to exist. And it also is going to heat up a lot. It's going to retain heat and change the microclimate of Los Angeles and increase that urban heat island effect. So this gravel type of landscape is, in my opinion, not a good landscape en masse. You see other versions of that, something like this, where you have decomposed granite and jade plants and agave here. Again, there's a lot of open ground kind of baking in the sun. There's no shade and there's no mulch. And so this is going to have water evaporate really quickly and really heat things up. Then you're seeing a lot of these kind of hybrid landscapes where you have gravel. Look, there's nothing alive there. It's completely sterile. You have gravel, you have boulders, then you have artificial grass in the background. Artificial grass is something that has more and more been put out as this solution. This came in the mail, and when I got it, I was like, wow, you sent this to the wrong person. The drought is back. Synthetic grass is the answer. So a company mailed me this, and I was thinking, man, I can't. This is ironic. I'm going to get into why I don't think it's the answer, but this is certainly an idea out there that we can save water. The environmental choice is to use artificial grass. And you see different applications of that. You see sort of this high-end designed application, which has the artificial grass incorporated in with these sort of rocks and succulents. You have the more sort of standard front yard artificial grass of this front yard here. You've got artificial grass with the walkways and the kind of added little cherry on top of the vinyl plastic fencing. So literally the entire yard is made of plastic. You've got this one, which was kind of new to me. You have a artificial turf kind of front yard, then you have a wall, then you have an artificial bougainvillea hedge. So that's a plastic bougainvillea hedge. in the background, that blue stuff. And to me, thinking of this as an environmental solution is actually quite insane, because we're literally covering the ground with plastic. I mean, how could that just doesn't seem possibly environmental, and it doesn't work that well. I mean, that's the thing. At the end of the day, it may look good and clean for a few years, but eventually the weeds are going to get in. And this sort of irony of this photo is this is artificial turf being reclaimed by Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass is actually pretty tough, tenacious, and low water grass that also happens to be invasive, but it's broken through and taken over. And eventually this artificial turf gets deteriorated to the point where it can't be used anymore. It gets scraped up and thrown in the landfill. And during the whole time that it's sitting out on the landscape, just think about what's happening. It's baking in the sun. It's getting rained on. Little bits of the plastic are washing out into the watershed. So we're adding much more and more plastic into our environment in a time when that's already, we're already inundated by plastics in our natural environment. So this is, to me, probably the worst solution to drought that you can have. And it doesn't even not always take water, which is the crazy thing about artificial grass. My daughter's daycare when she was a little younger, had a artificial grass play area, and the kids all kept coming covered. No, they're just basically her arms, hands, legs would be black because of the dust. And every time you went down the slide or played on this grass, you'd get this horrible static electricity shock. So it turned out that the only solution to those issues of getting covered in black dust and getting these extreme static electricity charges playing was to spray the artificial turf with water a couple times a week to clean it off. And there are companies that specialize in washing artificial grass with water. So I will just come out and say, to me, this is not a solution to the drought, and it actually creates many more environmental problems in the long run. And I'm not trying to knock people. I know lawns are nice to have for different applications, and I'll talk about that in a second. But in terms of just an ornamental front yard, this is, I think, the last thing we should do. We'd be covering spaces that aren't used for recreation with artificial grass. So what makes people choose things in landscapes? Well, it's really, to me, kind of a taste and a trend. And sometimes people have interesting tastes, such as this topiary poodle at a gas station in Echo Park. Somebody liked it, and hey, to each his own. This is kind of charming, I guess. But really what we're talking about here is the taste and the aesthetics of our place and the fashion of it, because it really is a fashion, it's a trend. I've heard arguments that lawns complement the interesting architecture of Los Angeles, and so here's an image showing that, but I don't think they complement it nearly as well as this type of ecosystem garden. This is garden in South Central. Brandy Williams of Garden Butterfly has this beautiful front yard full of natives and climate appropriate, low water, drought tolerance, with all sorts of water catching systems. This wonderful garden in mid-city, it's a beacon of biodiversity. It's bringing in all sorts of pollinators and animals, and it's the only house on the block that isn't lawns, which is quite interesting. This was featured on our garden tour last year. Another garden featured on our garden tour, all native plants, low water, all actually hyper-local plants. And right now, these are the outliers, but this is what I hope will become the future vision of our landscape. And it's not just limited to home gardens. Here's a school garden. This is also featured on our garden tour in the San Gabriel Valley. What in many places would have been lawn or concrete is a vibrant and diverse ecosystem that uses much less water than a lawn. And it's not all or none. We can mix things together. So here at State Historic Park, it's a wonderful example of a mixed use space. It has low water native plants, which create habitat around the park, but it also has some lawns that are used for recreation. The key to this is that these lawns, which people picnic on, and they're really nice to have, they're all watered with reclaimed water. So rather than just dumping whatever excess water we have out into storm drains, which go out into the ocean, it's reutilized to create recreational opportunities for the general public. And I'm not going to say that we should get rid of all grass in all parks, and even some grass in some backyards that are actively being played on. But we should really be moving towards using reclaimed water to water all of those high water areas, and completely get rid of the ornamental lawns. You know, if you're not walking on it, playing on it, it shouldn't be a lawn, in my opinion. Instead, I believe we should do things like this. This is a California buckwheat. It's a hyper-local native plant at our headquarters here in Sun Valley. And the reason I would like to see this rather than any of those other options is because this landscape will support biodiversity. So look at all those interesting and unusual insects that live exclusively on that California buckwheat. If we pick these plants to replace our high water landscapes, we'll not only be saving water, but we'll also be creating habitats, creating ecological systems, and fighting both the drought and the extinction crisis at the same time. And that really just comes down to plant choice. So I want to move into a multiple choice sort of quiz of what is the future going to be for Southern California landscapes. Is it going to be business as usual? Or are we just going to keep things as they've always been? Are we going to go double down on artificial grass and have just a city made of plastic? We can have artificial shrubs and artificial trees, and everything can be made out of plastic fencing. Do we want to turn into a sort of a phoenix landscape of gravel with the occasional succulent? Do we want to go to that tropical aesthetic and have Honolulu in California? Or do we want a vibrant ecosystem of local native plants, shade trees, and recreational spaces maintained with reclaimed water? And I, for one, would strongly vote for choice E, a vibrant ecosystem of local native plants, shade, and recreational spaces maintained with reclaimed water. So I'm going to focus on how we get to that. If you all agree with me, and I hope you do, that should be kind of the primary focus of what we're moving towards as a region. How do we get there? Well, one of the things to think about in trying to answer that question is what's the bottlenecks right now? What is holding us back from this vision? So in my mind, there are a few things. One is that we need to redefine our aesthetic a little bit. We have kind of been conditioned to think that dry is bad, and we hear all the time, I just want lush, I don't like anything to be dry. And I'd like to challenge that a little bit, and I'll talk about how we do that in a second. We need to develop a more skilled horticultural workforce. Landscape industry is full of amazing people. I've worked in this field my entire career, I should say. And it's wonderful people, but we need more training as a cohort. We need to know more so that we can maintain plants better and have a little more nuance in our plant selection. And think of landscaping as gardening rather than landscaping. You know, when you say landscaping, you're envisioning a lawnmower and a hedge trimmer. We need to move beyond those two things to your pruners, your shovels, your trowels, to thinking of maintaining all of our lands as gardens, not just as sort of quick and easy, mow it and get out of there. Thinking about changing how that work is done and informing a whole new workforce to do that, and taking people along who've been doing this for a long time and teaching them new skills to take care of a new type of landscape. That goes hand in hand with design and designers who will embrace that concept and embrace ecology within their designs. And to support that, we will need a stronger native plant supply chain, and supporting that with the general public, simplifying things to the general public so that it's not this overwhelming burden of trying to figure out how to get rid of your lawn and create a drought tolerant landscape, but something that's a little more manageable. And I'll talk about that in a second. Policy is going to be really important on this, and I'll talk about one previous policy outcome that was really negative in the last drought. And then just education. We constantly need to be talking about education and educating people to get to where we want to go here. So I want to talk about dryness. here is a California native plant garden in Highland Park. This is the garden of Bruce Schwartz of LA Native Plant Source. It's one of my favorite gardens in the city, and he doesn't water at all in the summer. So here you're seeing some different plants. I see, hummingbird sage, and there's some lilies in the background. It's actually exceptional and beautiful. Here it is in springtime. Here it is in the summer. So it goes completely dry, and this scares people. People see this and they're like, I don't want that at all. So Bruce pushes it as far as it can go. I think what he's doing is amazing. I think there's incredible beauty in this cycle and the seasons that this landscape goes through. This is also wonderful for ecology because you're just allowing the natural expression of the land to move forth. Not everybody's going to be here yet. So there are ways of designing that keep things a little greener, even with low amounts of summer water. But I hope that over time, we can start to challenge these conceptions that this is a bad thing. Because when we go out hiking in the middle of the summer, we're not saying, oh my God, look at these plants, they're so dry. We're just realizing that's how they are in the summer. We know they're going to be green in the winter. That's the seasonality of plants. So if we can start to think of our landscapes in that way, we can really have a great impact on the water use and also the life and the ecosystems of our region. And we really tried to tell that story about a year ago. In our 2021 Native Plant Garden Tour, we went to 8 gardens throughout the city over the course of a whole year, starting in the winter through the spring and then returning in the fall to document how they changed. And we did a whole big spring event, and we came back in the summer and fall to share what the gardens looked like off of their peak bloom season. I encourage you to check that out on our YouTube channel. I think it's actually pretty remarkable how some of them look and finding that beauty in the dry garden, which can be as beautiful as anything you'll see. And again, I always bring it back to when you are in New England in October and you see the hills of red maple. It's absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. When you are in Central Park in January and you see the trees casting a shadow on the snow, it's absolutely beautiful. So if we can start to reframe our eye as Southern Californians to find beauty in the seasonality of where we live, we're going to be doing a great thing for the future health of our landscape. Now, the other big topic is developing a workforce that can maintain these gardens. It's not harder to do what I'm advocating for than any other type of gardening. It just takes a slightly different approach. So we've been thinking about this a lot at Theodore Payne of how can we build a workforce that will be ready to take on this challenge and guide the existing industry, which already has been here for a long time, but just to sort of grow it and strengthen it and bring more people into the fold. Because if we're really talking about major conversions, we need a whole lot more people. So one of the things that we have been working on and are excited to launch formally soon is our professional education portal. This is a site for all of our professional offerings, our educational content, and there'll be a couple of features that will be really great for the general public as well, including a job board where you can connect with ecological and drought tolerant gardeners to help you on your project, as well as a community forum for those professionals to troubleshoot the issues that come up, and then a lot of advanced coursework and classes that we can deliver through this portal. So we're really excited about that. And our flagship program within that professional portal is our California Native Plant Landscape Certification Program. And this is something we've been running for the last 2 years. We have graduated over 450 people have taken this course. It's an 18-hour course that covers all the fundamentals of native plant garden maintenance. And we've been focusing a lot on sole proprietor and small business owners and getting them trained up to work with native plants. But we've also recently been moving into more kind of larger organizational landscaping divisions, such as the landscapers at the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Los Angeles State Historic State Park landscape crew, and currently we're training the UCLA grounds division, which is really exciting. So there's all these small business owners are getting involved, and also these bigger kind of municipal spaces. So we're going to continue to push this education and the professionalization of this industry, and we think that's really going to be important. Another thing that's really going to be important for the future of solving these issues is sort of shoring up the native plant supply chain. So this image is what our nursery looked like after big weekends, which is pretty empty. And I apologize if you showed up and it looked like this. The last few years have really been crazy growth in the native plant world. And just as sort of an example, from what the amount of plants we've sold in the last year compared to the same year period in 2019 before the pandemic, we've grown by 64% in those 3 years, with 50,000 more plants sold than in the time before the pandemic, which is really incredible. And it's a testament to the changing tastes of the landscaping public and the gardening public, which is really exciting. But with that growth, occasionally you see things like this, and we just get cleaned out, and we always feel really bad when that happens, and we're tightening that up. And it's not just us; all of our friends who have nurseries have the same thing happening. You know, people are just buying native plants more and more and more, and so we need to have more production. One of the ways that we're taking that on is a new production site that we're in the process of constructing right now. Here's our director of horticulture, Tim Becker, at the Los Nogales Nursery site, which is at the Audubon Center at Debs Park. So we're in partnership with Audubon to help them operate this Los Nogales Nursery and scale it up to produce plants. As we think about the supply chain, the public, the professional industry, how these things all come together, one thing that we've been kind of repeatedly going back to is this idea of reducing complexity. I think of what it's like to walk into a nursery without being a gardener or horticulturist, and it's overwhelming. And I can say I've worked in botanical gardens and plant conservation or herbaria. I've done landscaping. I've worked in this my entire career, 15 years. I'm basically what you would call an expert, I would say, in plants and horticulture. I walk into nurseries and I'm overwhelmed. There's times when I was like, oh my God, I don't know anything. There's so much diversity out there. It's so for people to just step into this, it's daunting. It's hard. So we are thinking really, really hard about how can we find ways for people to make sense of that and to not feel overwhelmed by it. So here's a little example of kind of the lines we're thinking on. We knew people wanted to grow plants and grow seeds, and they wanted to support monarch butterflies. So we developed this kit, which has all the instructions, all the materials you'll need to grow a whole bunch of plants to create habitat for monarch butterflies. We've been thinking about, how can we do something similar for people converting their lawns? So stay tuned on that. It's sort of embryonic right now, but we're working on different lists of plants for, the working title is Drought Busters, of just really simple plants that can be used over and over again, that really are going to fit within that drought tolerant category, that are going to create habitat. They're going to be easy horticulturally, and just really trying to take some of the guesswork out of it and get to this next phase where it's a simpler kind of copy and paste version of installing and creating these gardens. So stay tuned for that. And the other, another really important component of this conversation is local natives. How local is local enough? And we've been working the last 10 years on something called our Local Source Initiative, which grows plants from specific areas. So this Salvia mellifera, black sage, says local from the Verdugo Mountains. So these plants will be ramping up this production of these plants. And the great thing about these is, they're going to be acclimated to the climate here because they came from here. So they're going to be really good choices for drought tolerance. Also going to be really good choices for creating habitat, because they're extending the wildlands around where we live in our gardens. And we're really excited about the prospect of that and getting that pushed out to the public. On all of these conversations, education is really key. So our education program has been working with all sorts of different groups. You're seeing a photo of a recent project where we did a 2-day workshop with different tribes, Native American tribes throughout California to work on restoration and nursery production, which was really great. We've got Alejandro leading our California Native Plant Landscaper Certification Program. And then we've got all sorts of general public classes. And if you're looking for where to start, I would recommend our intro class, Right Plant, Right Place, taught by Katie Tilford. We have our irrigation class taught by Max Cantor, a wonderful class about really the ins and outs and the nitty gritty of irrigation. And then our design series, which we have various teachers who are all working landscape architects and landscape designers who will guide you through the process of taking out your lawn and putting in a native plant garden. And that can be a much more cost-effective way of taking on the conversion of your landscape. So the other thing in this conversation, and I'm happy to say that I think things have gotten a lot better than during the last drought, but nuanced policy really matters. So getting this right as we go through these water restrictions is going to be really important. And there are some kind of horror stories or bad outcomes from the last drought. One in particular that people talk about often is the turf terminators sort of saga, when this company sort of predatorily came in and took a whole bunch of the rebate, the lawn rebate money, and put in these really shoddy gravel yards that sprouted weeds immediately and just like turned spaces into these kind of ecologically sterile, much hotter, much less visually compelling landscapes. So let's not let that happen. And the more advocacy we can all do as individuals and communities to our leaders is wonderful. And I am happy to say that all the conversations that I've had with people who are in leadership roles in government, there seems to be a lot more awareness of biodiversity. And you're seeing big government agencies in the city taking on biodiversity and understanding that it's an important component of this conversation. So as we save water, we can't create something that's sterile. Sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease. In the case of turf terminators, it was. So policy is key, getting that right, and making sure that we don't create more problems in trying to solve this problem. So I can't leave you guys without a little bit of horticultural knowledge. We've been talking big picture stuff, but I want to end with a little bit of horticultural info. So first, I want to kind of just break a few myths of native plants that are out there. One is that all native plants are drought tolerant. That's not true. Some native plants grow in rivers, and they're used to being in very wet areas, rivers, wetlands, lakes. Those are not drought tolerant plants. Depending on where you are, it's really going to make a difference what is considered drought tolerant or not. So if you plant a redwood in Sun Valley, it's going to take a lot of water, because where its habitat comes from on the coast of Northern California is much foggier and wetter than what we experience here in Sun Valley. So there's nuance. You can't just say all native plants are going to be drought tolerant necessarily. Another myth, all native plants go dormant in the summer and they look bad in the summer and they're dry. Some do. And as I mentioned, I don't think that's something we should shy away from. I personally think that's okay. And that cycle of the seasons is actually a beautiful thing to embrace. But you can design with evergreen plants that will look good all year. I think of things like toyon or hollyleaf cherry, beautiful evergreen plants that look vibrant and lush with very little water year round. Another misconception, native plants need no maintenance. You just put them in the ground and that's it. That's also not true. They need a different kind of maintenance. So unlike a traditional conventional landscape where you have a team come and mow the lawn maybe every other week, what you're going to have with a native plant garden is you're going to need maintenance every couple of months. You'll need to kind of tighten it up, check it, and that can be done DIY, and a lot of great native plant gardeners can do that DIY, or this emerging industry of native plant maintenance companies will be able to do that for you. Another myth, native plants can only be planted during a very narrow window. So we always get calls every fall around November when people are kind of freaking out because they're like, it's already November and I haven't planted yet, can I plant? And we of course say yes. And there is truth to the fact that you really, as much as you can, timing your planting with the wet season. So say November through February, March, that's going to be the easiest. It's going to be the most successful because the days are shorter, there's higher humidity, it's cooler, there's a lot more fog, so the plants are going to just be more acclimated and they'll have more time to grow deep roots before they kind of hunker down for the summer and stop growing, which is what many of the natives will do. But you can still plant plants outside of that cycle if you're careful about it and you're hand watering. And particularly in containers, those can kind of be planted all year, and there are certain plants that should be planted in the spring, such as the desert grasses, milkweeds. A lot of the succulents actually want to be planted in the spring rather than that fall window. Another myth, native plants don't require any water. We get this one all the time. People will come to the nursery and say, I planted my plants and they all died. What happened? And we'll say, did you water them? And they said, no, they're native plants. You don't need to water native plants. It's not true. You do need to water them, particularly in the establishment phase. So that first year or so of their life, they need to be watered. And they don't need to be watered a whole lot. And the best way to water them, honestly, in that time is to do it slowly, go around with your hose in your hand and water each one. Once they're established, if you pick certain plants, many of them can be weaned off of supplemental water. But the fact you can't just put it in the ground and walk away and they'll be fine. That's not it's not a realistic expectation. I personally find the active watering to be a very sort of zen moment. So I encourage, if you've never really gotten into hand watering, we spend so much time on these things and watching TV and doing all these other things. What I would really kind of, recommend is taking some of that time, going out in the evening when it's cool, going out first thing in the morning, and just sort of get into the spirit of just checking on your plants. Does it need water? Can I prune this back? You'll be surprised how healing it is and how what a joyful act that can be. And it actually counterintuitively uses a lot less water when you're just going by hand, because when you turn a sprinkler on, you forget about it. It's just going to be shooting out water whether you need it or not. When you're really going and checking plant by plant, it's a much less water, and I think it's really fun, and it's a great way to kind of calm down and decompress after a long day. And just some basic tips as we kind of wrap up here for native plant gardeners. So what should you do? Well, you should water deep and infrequent. So you're going to put water down, in large quantities at sort of long intervals. So maybe every 2 to 3 weeks you're going to water. Water quite a bit. You want to keep your plants watered regularly during the establishment phase of the garden, the first year or so. You want to use seasonality to your advantage. So plant right before it rains if you can. So keep an eye on the weather during that planting season. And if it's going to rain for the next week, that's a great time to get plants in the ground. Use that to your advantage. You'll save water, and also plants just seem to be much happier when you water them. Be careful about summer watering. So that it is true that you can kill plants by watering too much, especially in the summer. And things like Ceanothus, Manzanita, Fremontodendron, those will be very easy to kill with too much summer water. So that's something to be careful about. And then mulching and weeding are really important. Mulch will save moisture that's in the soil and prevent evaporation from happening, and it'll also keep weeds down. And then when you're weeding, you're pulling out other plants that are going to take up water from the roots of the plant that you want to be there. if you're seeing a ton of weeds in the summer sprouting, you're probably watering too much. That's another good rule of thumb. There shouldn't be a ton of weeds coming up in the middle of the summer. So in conclusion, what can we all do and as a community and as a region to address the drought? Here's what I would say. We can kill our lawns. We can continue to water our trees. We don't want to let all the trees die. That will reduce all the shade and make everything that much hotter. So kill your lawn, keep watering your trees by hand. Once you've killed your lawn, plant native plants. And we can help you with that here at Theodore Payne. There's other great nurseries around the city that can help you plant native plants, great companies that'll do it. Tell your friends that you're doing it and make some new friends and tell them. This is really a word of mouth situation where we need more and more people to get into the fold and to start to embrace this idea. And when I say make new friends, a great way to make new friends is gardening with people. So volunteer, you know, at a local park. Volunteer here at Theodore Payne to maintain plants. Test plots, a wonderful volunteer. Debs, Audubon Center at Debs is a great volunteer program. All those are opportunities to meet new people and make new friends and be part of a community. And it's kind of amazing to me when you're out gardening and you know your neighbor is out and he walks by, what are you doing? You talk about it a little bit. That's really sharing community in the way that, you know, centered on something that is really important and that's really beneficial to everyone and to our future. You know, there's no better way to make friends, I think, than to kind of work alongside side by side with someone and help them out. So, you know, if you have a neighbor who's talking about converting their lawn and you've already done it, go over and give them some pointers. I mean, I think that's something that you can do that will have real tangible benefits for everyone. And then I would say in general, the best thing that we can all do as gardeners is to embrace our climate and our ecology. Embrace where we live, love where we live, honor where we live. Don't try to import other parts of the world onto where we live, but just be content and happy with the amazing place that we have here in Los Angeles and in Southern California, because it really is an amazing place. And the plants are pretty cool too. The plants are amazing, and all of the wonderful life that exists because of those plants. So to me, the drought is actually an opportunity to rethink everything, rethink our entire landscape, and end up with a much more beautiful outcome for everyone. So thank you guys for joining tonight. I really appreciate you being here. Go to theodorepayne.org for all kinds of other information and classes and other things like that. Follow us at Theodore Payne on social media. And yeah, just appreciate you all being here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If there's any questions, I'm happy to stay on for a little bit. Yeah, and thanks everybody for being here. So, okay, I'm going to try to read. There's a lot of chat here. Someone asked about planted ceanothus in the fall and clay. How often should you water? If it's already established, I would say maybe every like 2 weeks or so. But you want to kind of scratch around, and if it's wet, if it's really wet around the base of the plant, I wouldn't water. But if it feels like it's pretty dry, then it's a good chance you'll be okay. Any other questions? I'm going to try to scroll up. Okay, water manzanita in the establishment phase of the summer. Yes, I would. So yes would be the answer to that, although it's a little nuanced. I wouldn't not water it at all, particularly if you planted it this past fall. I would. It's kind of like you want to water it just enough, but with the manzanitas and the ceanothus, you do run this risk of overwatering to the point where they where you can kill them with root rot. So just yes, you should water, but probably every like 10 days to 2 weeks. But you can always kind of scratch around the base of the plant, and if it seems like it's wet at all, like in the first couple of inches, that means you don't need to water it. If it's bone dry, say 3 inches deep, it's probably going to be okay to water it. How do we talk to people who still water their sidewalk? I see that all the time. I mean, actually today I was going to put it in the presentation, but I didn't have time. As I was ran out to grab something at the store, and I was driving back, and I saw a cattail growing out of like the sidewalk, and I was like, that's weird, because like, the cattail is a wetland plant. And so I stopped, and I had photos on my phone of this little cattail, and I looked up, and there's just this stream of water going down the edge of the road, making this sort of little like urban wetland. It was totally totally strange, but yeah, you see that a lot, and it seems to be there's certain people who just have broken irrigation and they're always watering. That's obviously kind of depressing to see these days when we know we're in a drought. People spraying off their sidewalks. I don't know, just I think you can. There is a way, and I don't have the URL on the tip of my fingers, but there is a way that you can report water kind of breaking of those restrictions. So you can look into that. Let's see. What's the chance of being able to successfully plant a toyon now on West Shannon Valley Screw? You could probably get away with planting a toyon in San Fernando Valley now, but I would just wait a few months. Just wait 2 or 3 months, you know, if you can, and it'll be a lot easier to establish. But you could probably do it if you really, really needed to, but it's just going to be that much harder, and you might not be successful. Let's see. Read that natives do better on deep and frequent sprinkler, not drip. How do I spare that with water restrictions and drought? That's a good question. So I've heard conflicting information about this. One question that a lot of us have been discussing is, can you add up all the water? So you get, in LA, we get 2 8-minute cycles per week. So it's 16 minutes per week. And then, you know, every 2 weeks, that would be 32 minutes. Every 4 weeks, 64 minutes. So if you had your native garden on a sprinkler system and you ran it once a month for 64 minutes, it would probably be pretty good in most situations, depending on what plants you had. I've heard that you can do that, but the website on LIDWP seems to contradict that. So I'm not sure if they allow that. I think probably open to suggestion to some extent. So I do think as a community, we should come together and find what's going to be best horticulturally within the restrictions that are being placed. Drip can work. You know, a lot of people don't like drip because it tends to break a lot and you don't really know when it's broken. Squirrels chew into it and mess it up, and then it also, like, it's just kind of hard to tell where the water's going. So the water will be like draining to one particular area, and you don't really know. So I think, yeah, overhead is a little bit easier, but I think that we need to pursue that idea about adding up that allotted time. I've bought plants for nurseries, but I don't know how to keep them alive during the weeks I'm busy before planting and keep killing them. I have no idea over or under watering when they are in nursery pots. So in nursery pots, you should be, if they're wet still, you should never water when they're still wet. Like, the top should fully, completely dry. And with natives, you want to let them go pretty dry. You don't want them to go bone dry, but the easiest thing to do is just kind of scratch around on the edge of the pot. And if it's very, if it's like totally bone dry all the way down, you can definitely water. If it's a little moist down deep, it's probably okay to water. If it's wet at the top, don't water, because you'll be overwatering them. And also putting them in a shadier spot, not full shade, but sort of half shade, is going to be a little bit easier. If you put them in full blazing sun, you're going to be just more challenging. So yeah, it takes time. You know, it's one of the kind of harsh realities about horticulture is you kind of have to kill a lot of plants to get good at it, in my experience. What is being done around supply chain issues for native plants, and also are there serious efforts underway to stimulate reshape demand? How can we norm natives and support those norms with adequate supply chain? Well, that's kind of what I was talking about. That's what we're trying to do. I mean, we're opening the new Deb's nursery. That's what we work on all the time. I mean, I could, could go on for another 2 hours about what we're trying to do on that. It's hard. I mean, it's not easy. You're going up against a very ingrained aesthetic and idea of what a landscape should be, and there's a lot of inertia. So changing the public opinion is not going to be easy, but I think it's possible. I think throughout my career, I've never seen this level of sort of like ability to do it. Like I feel like there are like serious opportunities right now with both the drought, with people being aware of biodiversity. So I think if it's going to happen, now is an important time to be pushing that forward. Get invasives out of box stores, absolutely, definitely agree with that. Peaceful Valleys, California native grass seed mix. I'm not familiar with that particular mix, so I can't comment on that. I think we always get the question of, I want we actually kind of have some jokes here at the nursery where people will always want this really like almost outlandishly sort of perfect plant. They'll be like, I want something that's 60 feet tall and it's 1 foot wide and it takes no water and it grows with blazing sun on one side and complete shade on the other. And you're like, you can't have everything. It's just some things just don't exist. And the idea that we always get, I want something that is good for pollinators, that's flowering, that my kids can play on, my dog can run on, that takes no water and is green all year. And we're just like, you can't have, not everything is possible. So there has to be some compromise. Any chance of working with Antonio at SAMO to expand the nursery? Well, I'm in a band with Antonio called Sage Against the Machine. So I'll talk to him about it. But yes, Antonio is a really close buddy of mine, and they're doing great work out there. They grow more hyper local plant palette, and they're able to give their plants away. So they have a different model, which is really cool. What else we got here? Carapia, what do I think of Lipia? I've seen it. I've seen it work. I've also seen it not work. So I don't think it's a silver bullet that it's like, it's gonna replace every lawn and work just like that. So yeah, I guess I'm undecided about the Lipia as a ground cover. I think I've seen it do pretty well, and I've also seen it not do well. I think in general, though, the idea that like we should be really primarily targeting having a lawn replacement is sort of short-sighted, because I would rather see a more shrub and perennial dominated landscape, because that's going to be much better for pollinators. So I know some people, we're going to have some element of lawn or lawn-like environments, but I would hope and encourage that in ornamental situations, we don't use those. Getting some comments on Sage Against the Machine. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and check out our spot. We have on Spotify all of our music, and it's all, everyone in the band is involved in the native plant world. So we have Rico Ramirez, who's a botanist, field botanist, works for Caltrans. We have Nicole Calhoun, who's from Artemisia Nursery, owns Artemisia Nursery. We have Jason Sudith, who works in restoration. Hector Cervantes, who works he's worked in parks and had a number of jobs in this kind of ecological world. And then Antonio Sanchez from SAMO, it's a super fun band. Yeah, check out on Spotify Sage Against the Machine. And I really just thank you all for coming out tonight. Let's see, one more. Yeah, the trees. Yeah, trees are so important. I think we have to continue to have trees here. So that's just my opinion, but we shouldn't let trees die. That would be a really bad outcome. Trees are important, and they create shade, and they're great for habitat. So thank you guys all so much for joining this evening, and we're here. Come visit the nursery. I hope to meet you in person if I haven't, and those who I know. Nice to see you here. And yeah, thanks everybody. Have a great evening.